Turmoil in this major country is taking down price of silver. French chaos is causing a massive disruption with shockwaves reaching the price of silver here in the United States. I'm going to break this down to show you tensions over the growing far right in Europe is strengthening the dollar and pushing silver prices down. Listen closely. I want you to be prepared for what is coming your way. This is from goldbroker.com, and the article says, since gold broke the $2,000 mark, it has lost all of its speculative momentum. This could be good news for further gains. Historically, gold tends to stop correcting when the number of contracts on future markets reaches low levels, as is currently the case. This low level of activity could pave the way for further upside. Now, the drop in volumes on gold markets contrasts sharply with the tensions observed on European bond markets. The dissolution of the French National Assembly intensified tensions on the French bond market. This political instability led to a spectacular jump in the spread between the French 10-year and the German 10-year. What's happening in France is a perfect example of the struggle throughout this planet, and that struggle is the middle class. Whenever the middle class struggles, and it's not just happening here in the US, it's happening in Europe, it's happening all over. Whenever we see the middle class struggle, we see a movement of populism take place. And that's why especially this year, we're having elections throughout the globe. It's not just the big election here in the US. Every major country is having an election this year. The movement going on in those elections are populist movements. We're seeing a big push toward populism. So what's happening in France is a great example of what we will see roll out as 2024 continues. The struggle that we see with the far right in France and the reaction to it is hitting the bond market in France and the bond market in Germany, just as our bond market struggles. Because when people feel uncertain, they pull from those bonds and they go into a safe store of wealth like these precious metals here. And that impacts our price of silver. Let's keep going. This article continues by saying the French 10-year is clearly in a new upturn. In a single session, Société Générale erased virtually all of its annual gains. Investors are betting on a weakening of the French bank's capitalization should the French bond sector come under pressure, and it certainly will. Volumes are significant, proof that markets are taking the risk of political instability. Seriously, whenever we see instability, any disruption, any uncertainty for the population, people pull away from those risks. They feel that the bonds are risk in any country. In our country, they feel like U.S. treasuries are a risk. They'll pull out and they'll go into the safe haven of precious metals like I'm holding here. They pull out of Wall Street because they feel like it's too risky. They don't like the instability. They go to precious metals. Let's continue. The article says the share of wages in GDP has been falling steadily over the past few years, and the enrichment effect of rising equity markets is affecting only 1 in 10 European households. Meanwhile, wage earners are getting poorer, and their savings are declining in real terms due to inflation. Is this sounding familiar? It sounds like what's happening here in the U.S. Tensions in France are enabling the dollar to hold on to its bullish support and cancel out its downward movement for the time being. Now, this is very interesting for the dollar because this past week, we've had Saudi Arabia announce that they were no longer following the petrodollar system, and that should be a massive blow to the dollar. But as instability rears its ugly head in France and Germany, the dollar actually shows more strength because people pull out of their bonds in those European countries and they invest in the dollar. And that shows strength of the dollar again. So we always have to watch these moving pieces because it directly impacts the price of silver. The stronger the dollar becomes, people pull out of silver and they go to treasuries. That's the history of stacking silver. Likewise, the weakening of the dollar, when we first saw Saudi Arabia last week pull out of the petrodollar system, we knew that was going to show a weakness in the dollar and people were going to move towards silver and gold and increase the prices of those precious metals. That's the history of these precious metals, and it plays out time and time again. Let's continue with this article. They say that the situation for silver in euros is more fragile. A bearish divergence has formed, threatening to break the upward trend, and bearish silver traders are aiming their first target at a retest of the silver breakout in euros at 24 euros, which could coincide with a safe haven trade on the dollar should France become unstable on June 30th. However, the situation on the physical market complicates matters. Stocks in China are at record lows. It's hard to speculate on the COMEX when stocks are disappearing in Shanghai. Out of all of these moving pieces, Saudi Arabia pulling out of the petrodollar system, political turmoil in France, populism taking hold of middle class populations, the key that we need to look at for the price of silver is really that balance between Saudi Arabia pulling out of the petrodollar system and the bond market in France impacting the strength of the US dollar, because that strong US dollar directly impacts the price of silver. Every chart, you could Google this, every chart we look at showing the strength of the dollar as compared to the price of silver, time and again, we always see when the dollar shows strength, silver loses value. When the dollar weakens, silver increases value, and that is our spot price. So if you're new to stacking silver, these are the data points that we need to analyze, because this shows us what's coming down the pike for silver. If you're enjoying this video, if it's helping you, please hit like, please hit subscribe. It really helps to get this information out there.